The chainsaw, the one essential piece of gear, whether you're doing arborist work, logging, milling beams, building a log cabin, or just cutting up a year's supply of firewood. A chainsaw has 1,000 uses, but it has one essential requirement. It needs to have a well-adjusted, well-sharpened, well-tuned chain. Today I'll show you the basics of how to keep your saw chain cutting as good as possible. My name's Dave Whipple. You're watching Bush Radical. Now before we get started, let's make sure that your chain is snug. Doesn't need to be super tight, but it can't be loose. It'll make sharpening much more difficult. Once your chain's adjusted, you're going to want to lock the saw into a vise, whether a little stump vise like this or a bench vise in your garage. If you have a vise handy, it's best to use it. You can sharpen a saw without it being locked in place, but having it immobile is going to make it much easier. You're going to get a better result. Each tooth has a line that shows you the correct angle to set your file at. Just stick with that line. You want the underside of this leading edge to be nice and sharp. And most important, you want this tip, this corner right here, to be free of any dings or defections or rollover or anything. You want to clean that tooth up until that's a nice, true, sharp corner. Sometimes, when you're passing your file through, a little bit of upward pull can help. Cutting edge of that tooth looks like a cresting wave, and the file sits in here like this. Sometimes a little bit of upward pull will help it reach that very cutting edge and clean the corner of the tooth up. If you put too much downward pressure, you could cut into the gullet and never actually clean up the cutting edge up here at the point. You don't really have this issue with the correct size file, but if you have several different sizes of chainsaws like I do, sooner or later you're likely to find yourself out in the woods with a file that is a size smaller than what you want. But you can still get your chain sharp with that file with just a little bit of upward pull. Always set your saw up in the vise so you feel the most comfortable filing with your dominant hand. If you're right-handed, it's going to be difficult to do the same quality of job using your left hand. The file is likely to wander around and you're going to have a harder time keeping the angle right. Just set it up so you can file with your dominant hand. And before you know it, we're all the way back around all the teeth. Now this is a file called a Steel 2-in-1, and it works fantastic. It has both round files and flat files and a rail system. It sharpens a tooth, takes the rakers down, and it's precise. It works perfectly. Kind of a complicated little unit compared to just a standard chainsaw file, but it turns out a fantastic result, and it takes the raker down in proportion to the tooth on either side of it. You see the steel rails running on adjacent teeth. There's a file cutting the tooth, and there's a square file in the middle that's also taking down the raker. The angled handles also act as a gauge to help you keep your tooth angle correct. Generally, you would have to carry a chainsaw file, a raker file, and a raker depth gauge, and this product pretty much takes care of everything. A quick search online shows you can pay as much as $54 at Ace Hardware or $21 on eBay. So just make sure you're not overpaying when you buy one, and make sure that you buy the right size for the chain on the saw you actually have. Now that we have our teeth sharp, it's time to move on and file down the rakers. I like to just do this by hand and eye, and I go a little bit extra to get a little more aggressive cut, especially when cutting softer woods like poplar, pine, or cedar. I like to take the handle of the file or a little chunk of wood and set it right over top of the tooth. What this does, keeps my raker file from sliding off of the raker into the face of the tooth and marring up the tooth. What I'm generally looking for is I want to see the same amount of flat on top of this raker from one raker to the next. So I try to keep the file as flat as possible so it's not rocked up one way or the other. Cover up the cutting tooth. Make a couple passes on that raker. I move down to the next one. I want about that same amount. Now of course the more I sharpen this chain, the more I will be sending this cutting edge farther back. The teeth are not flat, they actually have a little bit of rise to the front end. The farther back you sharpen this, the lower that contact point is going to be. Each time you sharpen your chain, you're lowering this point a little bit at a time, and you're going to want to take your raker down just a fuzz to compensate for that. Now how far down do you want to take your raker? If you're cutting softwood, you can take it down farther and it'll pull bigger chunks out. If you're cutting hardwood, maybe not so far, as it's going to be a lot harder on your saw. With a really aggressive chain, it's going to stress the motor a little bit more. So take the rakers down according to what wood you're cutting. You can see there's a flat spot on top of the raker. I'm judging that by eye, but it's always worked well for me. This only takes a minute. You can get a good rhythm going. Now, of course, they make a jig for doing this, so you don't have to guess. Now, a factory depth gauge and file set like this is going to be very consistent. It's going to give you the same height rakers every single time. but it's kind of middle of the road and moderate. If you're cutting really soft wood and you have a powerful saw and you'd like to really hog some material, it's not going to have as much of an aggressive grab, but it's going to do the job and give you a good middle of the road cut. So a gauge like this is about $8. You get the gauge and the file, and you're just filing down that raker until you run into the gauge, and there's nothing else. You're not grabbing that raker anymore. Then you know it's good. Also, with a gauge like this, it's going off the teeth on either side of it. So you're getting a consistency to it that you're probably not going to get if you just file them by eye, by hand, one at a time. So whether you want to set yourself up with a newfangled tool like this, or just use a standard old chainsaw file, the principle of sharpening a chainsaw is universal regardless of what product you're using to get the chain sharp. And even if your chain is razor sharp, it's not going to do you any good unless you take those depth gauges or rakers down so that the leading edge of that tooth is actually catching wood fibers. Keep your chain sharp and well adjusted, and your saw is going to do exactly what you want it to do. Thank you guys so much for watching. My name's Dave Whipple, and you've been watching Bush Radical. Be radical, eh? See you soon.